Hey guys, this is Emily with the Archer and Olive 2022 Ambassador team. You might know me as Planted on Instagram or from my blog of the same name. Today I'm showing y'all some of my yearly review spreads in my bullet journal and talking about how to make one for yourself. There's an accompanying blog post over on Archer and Olive that will link below that has some photos of my spreads and more details of my process if you learn better from reading. I also created a free principle for you guys to use to help brainstorm and plan out your review spread. Let's get started. The first question you might have is, what is a year review spread? It's pretty self-explanatory when you look at it visually. It's basically an overview of your year that includes different categories and items of information you might like to track or notate from year to year. For this spread, I tracked some statistics on exercising, some of my listening habits from Spotify, movies and shows, TV shows that I watched, as well as some books that I read, a few pictures of important memories from out the year, and a little timeline on the bottom that shows at a glance some of the important and memorable things that happened this year. Then I kind of filled in the blanks with some doodles that reflected a lot of things that happened this year. So these are the kinds of things that I put in my spread for 2020, and you'll see that my 2021 spread from last year is also super similar to this setup. But this is your spread, so you should get as creative with it as you want. Pick out which categories are important to you and what kinds of things you want to track that you think might be fun to look back on in the future. It could end up just being a bunch of pictures and memories from the year. You don't have to add in all the extra stuff like I have, or you can track different things. It's totally up to you. Let's talk about what kinds of supplies we're going to need to set this up. As far as supplies go for this spread, you don't need anything super out of the ordinary. Obviously, you need a journal. I'm using a B5 Archer and Olive dot grid journal right here, and I used an A5 for my 2021 spread. You'll also need a pencil to sketch with, as well as an eraser to erase pencil markings. Then some sort of straight edge or ruler, whatever you use for your spreads, and some sort of pens to add in ink. I personally like the Pigma Micron pens and Prismacolor fine liners, but you can use whatever works for you. If you want to add some color into your spread, you can absolutely do that as well with some sort of Crayola markers or mild liners, whatever floats your boat, but this isn't something that you have to do. You can also print off photos to add or add in some sort of stickers or washi tapes if that's something that you vibe with. Once you have your supplies gathered, the next thing, well, really the first thing you want to do to set up your spread, and this is kind of the most important part, is to brainstorm the ideas of what kind of information you want to have in here and to go ahead and look up and write down all of that information now so that you have an idea of how much information will be going into each of the sections. So let's take a look at the printable I made that will help with this. Your printable should end up being 4 pages total. The first 2 pages are mostly just ideas that I have brainstormed for you guys of different categories you could have in your spread and specific things to track within each category. You're definitely not limited to what I have listed here. It's just a jumping off point to help you get your creative juices flowing. Summer categories I have in my own spreads, music, books and reading, important memories, etc. Within each category are ideas of things you could track, like favorite genres you listened to that year, numbers of movies that you watched, all kinds of statistics regarding reading. I've also seen a lot of people add some really funny printouts of memes that were popular throughout the year in their spread, or if there was a particular political decision or election you felt was important to remember, you can add that as well. So take a look at these pages and you can go through and mark what stands out to you as something you might want to add. And then if you have an idea, different idea that I don't have listed, you can add that here in this little square down here. The third page is basically a bunch of boxes with each month of the year in them. If you're wanting to include a timeline like I did on mine down here, or you just want to have a place to write down or record all your memories that you want to include, this is the space to list all of that in advance. I find it super helpful to have all of this laid out in advance so you can determine what specific events you want to include before you start and get an idea of how much space to list out for them. What I do when I'm going through something like this, trying to remember events and things, is I look back on my monthly review spreads. This one is from November 2020. I try to make one of these every month and list out different memories from the month, shows I watched, what I was reading, and finances. This is super helpful to refer back to when I'm making my yearly spreads. So I highly recommend adding something like this to your journaling routine because they're just a lot of fun and, again, really helpful when you're making these yearly spreads. Another thing you can do is look through your phone photos to jog your memories on certain events that you might want to put into your. So for November, I'd put we got married because we got married November of 2020. You could add in certain trips, new job, starting school, moving, fun holiday or other celebration. This is all stuff that you could list in the specific box beforehand so you know how much space to have on your spread. This last page of the printable includes some space to compile and write down all the information and stats that you want to include in your spread. For this, you can refer back to the idea page and what you notated on there of things you want to track. So let's say you decide you want to track some reading and books info. You can write reading and books up here and then write down how many books you read, how many fiction versus nonfiction, whatever you decide you want to include. Having all this information listed out before you start on your spread will make things so much easier once you start creating. I find it really distracting to have to stop the creative layout process to go look something up on Goodreads or Spotify or wherever you're tracking your information to look up that stuff. So doing all of that in advance is something I highly recommend. You don't have to use this exact printable to do it, but writing it down somewhere else in your notebook or on a plain piece of paper is a good idea. So this is my spread from 2021 that I did in an A5 craft paper Archer and Olive journal. As you can see, it's pretty much the same layout and kind of information that I tracked as last year, but it's a little bit more compact with a smaller size. So now it's time to actually start sketching out and creating your spread. When I'm making these, I always start with pencil. That's really for any of my bullet journal spreads. I sketch everything out in pencil first because I am just not the kind of person who can go in with ink immediately. The first thing I sketch is the title, which for both of these spreads I had in the middle of the page because that just made the most sense to me, but obviously you can put yours wherever you want. Then I went through and I kind of blocked out how much space I wanted for each category and section. This is when it's really helpful to have all of your information you want to include listed somewhere else already because you have a much better idea of how much space you'll need for each section. And then once you have each of your sections blocked out, then I go in and I sketch out the titles for each category, and I kind of lightly write in pencil all of the information I'm including so I know if I want to skip spaces or put it all in one, or I do my little TV doodles or whatever. Once you have everything sketched out the way you want, then it's time to go in with your ink or fine liners and solidify things. This is also where you can add any media or other color that you want to add to give your spread some pizzazz. And there you have it, a little overview of how I make my yearly review spreads. If you want to see what I create for my 2020 review this year, make sure to follow me on Instagram at Planned and Planted, and to also follow Archer and Olive as well. If you decide to make your own spread, be sure to tag both of us so we can see what you make. I love seeing everyone's own twists on these spreads. Happy planning!